every time we are solving variation, it reminds us on uh, it reminds us to take good care of our life. Kasi sinabi nga natin, life, yung buhay natin is isa lang. So, a very wonderful day to all of you, my dear students. It's wonderful. It's because you are going to learn again something about math. So we are going to continue our discussion about variation. So we are now on lesson number 2. So on lesson number 2, we are going to discuss here another kind of variation. So we're through on discussing direct variation. Sinabay na natin yung direct square variation, which is the one under direct variation. So let's discuss today another kind of variation. And this variation is what we call as inverse variation. So ano nga ba yung inverse variation na yan na sinasabi natin? So how it is different from the first kind of variation that we have discussed. So without further ado, let's start it now. So alamin na natin kung ano nga ba yan at kung paano nga ba natin solve that kind, yung ganyang kind of variation. So, ayaw natin on defining first what is what we call inverse variation. So, inverse variation, my dear students, sabi dito, it tells that if one quantity increases or decreases, the other quantity decreases or increases. So, parang ganito yung kung naguguluhan ka, as one quantity increases, the other quantity decreases. Or yung kung isa pataas, yung isa pababa. Or the other way around. If one quantity decreases, the other quantity increases. Kung pababa yung unang quantity mo, pataas naman yung pangalawang quantity. So still, this involves two quantities. So just like direct variation, two quantities lang involved natin dito. So, for example, if you do have a table of values, kapag yung values of x mo pataas, dapat yung values ng y mo pababa. Or kapag ang values ng x mo pababa, dapat ang values ng y mo ay pataas. So, medyo naguluhan tayo ng application of it. Dito, best application of the law of supply and demand. Na binanggit natin dun sa direct variation. Kapag maraming mataas yung supply, mababa yung presyo. Diba? Mataas na supply, mababang presyo. So, isang quantity mataas, isa mababa. So, or pag mababa yung demand, yung supply, mababa yung supply, mataas naman yung presyo. So, that's the best example of inverse variation. So, ganun natin siya ina-apply into real life. So, kaya nga diba sabi, one of the useful ideas in mathematics daw yung variation. Kasi, every day of our life, nagagamit natin siya. Maaaring hindi natin nalalaman, pero nagagamit natin yung variation in our everyday life. So again, variation tells that if one quantity increases or decreases, the other quantity decreases or increases. Next, in inverse variation, the product of two quantities is constant. This time, the word is product. Not unlike direct variation, but the direct variation is ratio. So you're just going to divide the first quantity to the second quantity. Dito, in inverse variation, you are going to get the product of the two quantities. So multiply the two quantities and you will get the constant of variation or the constant of proportionality o sa banading salita, yung K na binabanggit natin. So ito parang kabaliktaran nung inverse variation kasi dito when you translate, di ba sa inverse direct variation, yung unang product, yung pangalawang translation, quotient o ratio. Dito, sa inverse variation, yung una mo, ratio, yung pangalawa naman, product. For you to find for the constant of variation. So, also, for you to know that you are dealing with inverse variation, so, mayroon tayong words there that we have to look at para malaman natin that we are dealing with inverse variation. Just like the statements like varies inversely as or inversely proportional to. So the word inverse is there. So it would be better if those words are there for us to identify right away what kind of variation are we pertaining to or are we solving. So dapat makikita natin yung words or statements like varies inversely as or inversely proportional to. So paano nga ba tayo translate ng statement of variation into symbols? So let's have these exercises here. So we do have first here statement of variation, then we're going to translate it into symbols. So these statements of variation that we're going to give here are statements of variation involving inverse variation. So una, y varies inversely as x. So this time we are pertaining to inverse variation. So paano nga ba natin siya na-translate? Diba just like how we translate direct variation, we should translate it in two ways. Dapat both ways natin siya translate. Una, translate it on the same way as we read it. Then the other one is translate it in terms of k. So ano yung unang translation niya? It's the same as we read it. So y varies inversely as x. So paano yun? So unang translation, if we're going to translate y varies inversely as x as the same as we read it, it will be the same as y is equal to k over x. Ito yung sinasabi natin na this time, ratio yung mga una bago yung product. So, of course, yung una pa na binanggit mong variable, that will be on the left side. Then yung pangalawang variable, that would be on the denominator part. Then ano yung nasa numerator? Yun yung constant of variation o yung k. And katulad sinabi natin, that is the most important thing in variation. Even though we did not mention k in the statement, still once we translate it into symbols, k is always there. So if we are translating inverse variation, that k is the numerator and that second variable being mentioned is on the denominator part. Then the other translation, which is the translation in terms of k. So sabi dun sa definition ng inverse variation, ang inverse variation daw, in inverse variation, the product of the two quantities is constant. So ano ba yung dalawang quantities natin yan? That would be y and x. If we multiply the two, we'll come up with the constant of variation. So it will be k is equal to xy. So when we write the two variables, dapat pag sinulat natin siya, naka-align pa rin siya kung paano siya in the English alphabet. So ano ba yung una in the alphabet? Diba? That is x. So pag sinulat natin siya as product, una pa rin dapat yung x. Kasi pares lang din naman yun eh. So, yun nga, mas magandang tignan, hindi awkward tignan na tama yung pagsulat mo. Na dapat sinusulat na pa rin natin siya the same way kung ano yung mas nauna in the alphabet. Kasi mas awkward tingnan kapag YX. Diba? So, let us just make it right na mas mauna pa rin dapat yung kung ano mauna in the English alphabet. So, again, when we translate it into in terms of k, you just have to get the product of the two variables involved in the product. So that's how we translate statements of variation involving inverse variation into symbols. Let's try another. A is inversely proportional to B. The statement of is A and B are the quantities are A and B. So first translation niya, it will be A is equal to K, that A is on the left side, then that B is on the right side. Yun nga lang, B is on the denominator part because the numerator part is the constant of variation. That would be K. So A is equal to K over B. Then, or its translation in terms of K, so A and B yung quantities involved, so the product of it, that should be K is equal to AB. Next, P varies inversely as the square of Q. Ito yung sinasabi natin na sa ibang kind of variation, makita natin yung word na square. Pero hindi siya direct square variation. Eh wala naman tayo tinatawag na inverse square variation. So walang ganun. Walang ganun na kind ng variation. Ang meron lang ay direct square variation. Pero pwede kang gumamit pa rin ng square na word even if you are solving any kind of variation or anong kind of variation, pwede mong gamitin yung square na yon. That's not only limited to direct variation. Just like in this statement, P varies inversely as the square of Q. O translate natin siya the same as we read it. So we come up with P is equal to K over Q squared. So take note we made use of a capital P and Q, capital letter P and Q. Once you translate it into symbols, ganun din dapat. Capital P and capital Q pa rin dapat. So we made use here sa pangalawa ng small letter A and B, lowercase niya. So dapat ganun din yung makikita natin sa translation niya. So hindi pwede yung malaking capital A or capital B na gagamitin niyo. So you have to write it correctly. Kung ano yung given quantity in the statement, so ganun din dapat yung gagamitin yung quantities when you translate it into symbols. That's very important. So next, another translation is its translation in terms of K. That will be K is equal to P Q squared. So again ulitin ko dapat kung ano yung mas nauna in the alphabet, yung pa rin pagsulat natin. Next, number 4. C is inversely proportional to the cube of D. So we have here the word cube of D. So pag translate natin siya into symbols, yung first translation niya, the same as we read it, that would be C is equal to K over D cube. D raised to 3. That's what we mean by cube of D. That should be D raised to 3. Then, this translation in terms of K, that will be K is equal to C D cube. So that's how we translate statements of variation into symbols involving inverse variation. Again, ulitin ko that is very important in order for us to solve any kind of variation, yung translation. Kasi pag tama yung translation mo of the statement of variation, everything will follow. Everything will follow correctly. So, doon pa lang sa translation, dapat tama na yung ginagawa natin. Kasi, when we solve direct variation, di ba, tatandaan nyo, meron tayong steps doon na sunod-sunod na dapat gawin natin. So, once you start it correctly, you will end up correctly. So, dapat ganun yung gawin natin. Translation pa lang, tama na, para tama, magiging sagot natin. Okay, so just like direct and direct square variation, so in order for us to solve inverse variation in a systematic manner, still we are going to apply the same steps that we applied on solving direct and direct square variation. Kasi sinabi nga natin, di ba, these steps that we called life, ito yung steps na gagamitin natin in solving any kind of variation. So sa mga susunod pang kinds of variation na pag-aaralan natin, we are going to apply the same steps that we call life. Sabi nga natin, every time we are solving variation, it reminds us to take good care of our life. Kasi sinabi nga natin, life, yung buhay natin is isa lang, so pangalagaan natin yung buhay natin. So ano nga ba ulit yung life na yan, na steps natin solving any kind of variation? Una, L, let's translate statement of variation into symbols. So ayun yung ginawa natin kanina. So it would be better if you're going to do it correctly. So sa start pa lang, tama. Kung tama ka doon, you'll end up correctly. So I, its constant of variation should be find or sought, should be sought. So we are now going to find for the constant of variation using the second form equation. Then third step, form the equation of variation. So since you already have the value of K, substitute mo lang yung sa first form equation, you will come up with the equation of variation. And that equation of variation that we formed on step number 3, yun naman yung gagamitin on step number 4 is, stands for equation form, should be used in solving for the unknown. So that same steps are to be used also in solving for inverse variation. So it's about time that we are now going to solve an example involving inverse variation. So let's have example number 1 here. Let's have this problem. So if y varies inversely as x and x is equal to 3 when y is equal to 4, find y when x is equal to 12. So using the first, unang-una, we have to find out for the statement of variation. So in that given problem, the statement of variation is y varies inversely as x. So using the first step, so what we are going to do is to translate first this statement of variation into symbols. So pag-translate natin siya into symbols, so yung y varies inversely as x, if we're going to translate it the same way as we read it, that will be the same as y is equal to k over x. Then, the other translation will be its translation in terms of k. So sinabi nga, kapag inverse variation, it's the product of the two quantities. The two quantities are y and x, so it should be k is equal to xy. Next, using the second step, so let us now find for the value of k using the second form equation, the translation in terms of k. Yun yung gagamitin muna natin in order for us to find for the constant of variation, because constant of variation is denoted by the symbol small letter k. So that is to be used in order for us to solve for k, and also using a complete value of x and y in the problem. Sabi ito, x is 3 when y is equal to 4. So let's make use of that. Substitute lang natin. So k is equal to 3, yung value ng x, times 4, which is the value of y. So 3 times 4 is 12. So the value of k now is equal to 12. So applying the third step, since you already have the value of k here, which is equal to 12, so substitute that 12 on the first form equation. Ito yun. The y is equal to k over x. Pag substitute natin siya, magiging ganito. That will be y is equal to 12 over x. And that new form equation, that is to be used in the last step. So using that y is equal to 12 over x, ito yun ha. So kung ano yung mapuform nyo dito again, yun yung gagamitin sa pang-apat na step. So y is equal to 12 over x. Using that, find y when x is equal to 12. Substitute lang natin in place of x, that will be 12. So we'll come up with y is equal to 12 over 12. So y is equal to 1. So the value of y is 1. So that's how we answer example number 1 involving problems about inverse variation. Let's see if we are really dealing with inverse variation. Ang value ng x natin ay una ay 3, naging 12. So 3, 12, pataas yun. Ang value ng x mo, ng y mo ay 4, naging 1. So pababa naman. One quantity increases, the other quantity decreases. So that means we are really dealing with inverse variation. So next example, hopefully naintindihan natin. So para mas naintindihan natin mabuti, let's try another example. So let's have example number 2. So if C is inversely proportional to D and C is equal to 30 when D is equal to negative 9, find D when C is equal to 540. So let's find out first for the statement of variation. The statement of variation there is C is inversely proportional to D. That is our statement of variation. That statement of variation is to be used in applying the time step number 1. So applying our step number 1, let us translate that statement of variation into symbols. C is inversely proportional to D. So sa laging tatandaan, yung unang variable, yun yung agad yung nasa left side. Since inverse variation yan, quotient tayo, ratio ng constant of variation to the other quantity. So it will come up with C is equal to K over D. And for the other translation, always remember kapag inverse yan, so ang constant ang K niya is equal to the product of the two quantities. C and D lang naman yon. So we'll come up with K is equal to CD. Then, applying the second step, itong pangalawang form equation na equal to K, that is to be used in order for us to find for the constant of variation. So using K is equal to CD, and also using a complete value of C and D in the problem, so let us find out for the constant of variation. So that will be, substitute, 30 times negative 9. So 30 times negative 9 is equal to negative 270. So the value of K is equal to negative 270. And using that value of K, we substitute that negative 270 to the first part equation na C is equal to K over D. So we'll come up with C is equal to negative 270 over D. Then find D, sabi ito, find D when C is equal to 540. Using the new form equation na C is equal to negative 270 over D, what we are looking for is D. So ito yun. This is what we are looking for. So even though we are looking for the value of D, ito pa rin yung gagamitin natin para makuha natin yun. That same given equation that we formed on step number 3. Substitute lang natin. So C in the problem given is 540 equal to negative 270 over D. Paano ba natin gagawin yun? You can do cross multiplication. Ito, 540 times D is equal to negative 270. So pag ginawa natin yun, 540 over D, 540D is equal to negative 270. So, since you are looking for D, so divide mo both sides of the equation by 540. So, magkakaroon ka ng negative 270 over 540 when reduced into lowest term, that would be equal to negative 1/2. So, the value of D there is negative 1/2. So, that's how we answer example number 2. So, hopefully, naintindihan na natin, pero mas maganda, mas maintindihan natin lalo if we are going to answer more examples. So, let's have example number 3. So, example number 3, so the problem is, if M is inversely proportional to N, and M is equal to 1/2 when N is equal to 4, find N when M is equal to 6. So una, look for the statement of variation. So the statement of variation there is M is inversely proportional to N. So translate natin siya into symbols, applying the first step. M is inversely proportional to N, so that will be M is equal to K over N. That would be its first translation. That would be its translation the same way as we read it. Then the other translation is in terms of K. So we come up with K is equal to Mn, the product of the two quantities. Then, using K is equal to Mn, pangalawa natin, laging pangalawa yung mauunang gagamitin ha. K is equal to Mn. So 5 for the value of K using complete value of M and N. So M is 1/2, N is 4. So we'll come up here with 1/2 times 4. So that would be 1 times 4. So 1 times 4, that would be 4 divided by 2. So that would be K, which is equal to 2. And that K equal to 2, substitute that to M is equal to K over N for you to form the equation of variation. So we'll come up here with M is equal to 2 over N. And lastly, so for us to find out for what is unknown in the problem, so using M is equal to 2 over N, balik tayo doon, find N when M is equal to 6. So N is what we are looking for. Ito yon. Huwag tayo basta-basta sa substitute nang hindi natin titignan kung ano siya na substitute natin. This time, what we are looking for is N. The given value is M. So ito yon. So we have to be mindful of it. So, dapat alam natin kung ano yung sinasubstitute natin. So, pag sinubstitute natin, magiging 6 is equal to 2n. Just like ginawa natin sa sa first example, sa example number 2, cross multiply tayo. 6 times n, that would be 6n. Then 2 times 1 yan, that equal to 2. Magiging 6n is equal to 2. So since you are looking for n, so you have to divide both sides of the equation by 6. So magiging 2 over 6. When you come up with 2 over 6, so as if you will find out, it's not yet simplified. So when you simplify 2 over 6, you come up with n, which is equal to 1/3. So that is the value of n. That's how we answer also example number 3. Let's have more examples. Let's have now example number 4. Example number 4, the given is, or the problem is, if W varies inversely as the square of V and W is equal to 20 when V is equal to 4. Find W when V is equal to 15. So, statement of variation is W varies inversely as the square of V. So, yung una natin, yung statement. So, using the first step, translate natin statement of variation into symbols. So that would be W varies inversely as the square of V. That would be the same as W is equal to K over V squared. But in terms of K, if we're going to translate it, that would be K is equal to V squared W. So look at that. V squared W, because V comes first to W in the alphabet. So that's why once we translate it into symbols in terms of K, tama dapat yung translation natin. Kung una sa alphabet, ganun natin siya translate if we are pertaining to the product of it. That would be K is equal to V squared over V squared W rather. Then, using K is equal to V squared W and also using a complete value of W and V in the problem, so let's find out for the value of K. V is 4. V is 4. So V squared yun. So be 4 times 4, that would be 16 times W, which is 20. We do have 16 times 20, which is equal to 320. Next. So since we already have the value of K, that 320 is to be substituted to the first form equation of W is equal to K over V squared, for us to form the equation of variation. So we do have W is equal to 320 over V squared. And lastly, using the new form equation of W is equal to 320 over V squared, so let's find out for W when V is equal to 15. Find W when V is equal to 15. So, ginawa natin yon, so magiging W is equal to 320 over V is 15. 15 times 15 is 225. So since it's not exactly divisible, but we do have common factor there for us to reduce it into lowest term. So pag nireduce natin into lowest term, we come up with W, which is equal to 64 over 45. So that is equal again to 64 over 45. So that is by 5. So common factor nila ay 5. So divide natin 320 by 5, tsaka yung 225 by 5. So meron tayong 64 over 45. So that's how we answer example number 4. So let's try one more example para mas malinaw na malinaw. So let's have example number 5 here. So example number 5, so the problem is if Z varies inversely as the cube of H and Z is equal to 12 when H is equal to negative 2. Find Z when H is equal to negative 4. So the statement of variation there is Z varies inversely as the cube of H. So using the first step, translate natin yan into symbols. So that would be Z varies inversely as the cube of H. That will be First translation will be Z is equal to K over H cube. Then in terms of K, that would be K is equal to H cube Z. So, ganun pa rin tayo ha. Diba? H is comes first in the alphabet than Z. So, that would be K is equal to H cube Z. So, second, using K is equal to H cube Z. So, find for the value of K using a complete value of Z and H and Z. Z is 12 when H is negative 2. So, that would be negative 8 times 12. Paano yung naging negative 8? H is negative 2. A cube of it. Negative 2 times negative 2, that would be positive 4. Positive 4 times negative 2, that would be negative 8. Kaya negative 8 yun. Times 12 as the value of Z. Then, negative 8 times 12, that would be K is equal to negative 96. That's the value of K. Then using that value of K na negative 96, substitute it to Z is equal to K over H cube. So magkakaroon tayo ng Z is equal to negative 96 over H cube. And using that new form equation na Z is equal to negative 96 over H cube, so find out now what is asked in the problem. So find Z when H is equal to negative 4. So Z, it was already equated into Z, so mas madali na lang. So we'll come up with Z is equal to negative 96, ayun yun, over negative 64. Paano naging negative 64 yun? Negative 4 yung H. Negative 4 times negative 4, that would be 16. 16 times negative 4, that would be negative 64. So since both of them are negative and we are dividing, so we should come up with a positive answer. So since hindi naman siya exactly divisible, so we are going to reduce it also into its simplest form. So we do have now Z, which is equal to 3 over 2. So both 96 and 64 are divisible by 32. Yun yung GCF nila. So since both of them are negative, so the quotient will be positive. So the value of Z is equal to 3 over 2. So that's how we answer example number 5. So hopefully naintindihan nyo yung mga problems na sinolve natin involving inverse variation. So that's how we solve problems which involves natawag natin inverse variation. So that would be all for today. Goodbye, class.